Hey, everybody, and we are live with Office Hours episode number 20. I am solo today without Olivia Perez Breland, but I'm here to give you all the tips and ideas that come up around the military transition over the course of the past week. Before I start, I'd like to lead off with thanking one of our partners, Veteran Service Brands. Veteran Service Brands is a really cool company. They are a franchising company that has a couple of vehicles. And what I mean by vehicles is franchises. They've got their G-Force franchise, which actually does like parking lot striping. I've seen they've been putting up signs. They put parking bollards in. They do a lot of stuff for parking lots, resurfacing, everything. Then you've got their Paint Corps, which does commercial and residential painting. They've got their Field Ops athletic striping. And, so they do all the fields and everything else like that. And then they do their epoxy floors, which I've seen them do firsthand, which is amazing. And the beautiful thing about Veteran Service Brands is all the franchise partners are all veterans. Like, you have to be a veteran to get a franchise. And I don't know about you, but if I'm hiring someone to do one of those things around the house or around the business or whatever, the first place I start is if they're a veteran, they got a leg up on the competition because I know what they're going to bring to the table. And so what's great about Veteran Service Brands is not only do they have these products that are, great, you hire veterans to come take care of something you need, but there's also franchise opportunities and skill bridge opportunities. So for our community, if you're eligible for DoD skill bridge and you want to get into this and kind of learn more about the business, you could do your skill bridge with Veteran Service Brands. And if you are a veteran, you're interested in starting a business, starting a franchise under Veteran Service Brands, you can do that as well. So I encourage you to check them out on our page or reach out if you have any questions. All right, let's get into the topics of the week. First of all, I want to share that just a little while ago, I finished my last Mastering LinkedIn webinar of 2024. And I think we did easily over 20 events this year with, a fantastic community, the support of the USO, giving people tips and tricks. But I kind of wanted to boil down, aside from the tactics of using LinkedIn, I wanted to give you the two biggest takeaways on why and how you use LinkedIn that are going to set you up for transition success from the military. So the first part is I want you to consider LinkedIn. And if you are a hunter or are you a hoper? And what I mean by that is a hoper is someone that focuses on their LinkedIn profile primarily. Like, I want to get my profile right. I want recruiters to find me. I want them to offer me jobs, much like you've received career assignments throughout your military career. That is a hoper. They list everything up there, throw everything down there, and just pray that a recruiter will find them and offer them a job. The hunter is something different. The hunter is someone that says, I am going to create opportunity. I'm going to be a high performer. I'm going to get my profile good enough. And then I'm going to focus on doing informational interviews, sharing content, building the relationships that really help you figure out what you want to do, what people in that job do, right? And then how you can define your experience or highlight your experience in a way that makes you a best candidate. That's the hunter. Now, the key to being a hunter is the informational interview. And what I mean by that is an informational interview is speaking to someone in industry, not to get a job. Got to be clear on this. It is to learn more about what they do so that you can gain insight into what you want to do and make yourself a best candidate. So I will tell you, on the low end, if you haven't done at least 30 informational interviews, you are not transition ready. And I don't care what you've done. I don't care what rank you are. I have a friend that's a 2-star and we just spoke and they are above 30 informational interviews themselves. So, and they are already getting things lined up. And so what I'll tell you is it's basically start off by using LinkedIn, do searches and find people, ideally veterans, in companies, industries, or roles that interest you, reaching out, highlighting what you have in common, and just asking to connect and maybe get some advice and getting it to a phone call. Now, how do we do an information interview and why is it so important? So I will tell you, you do an information interview, you come prepared, right? The idea of an informational interview is you want to learn as much as you can about that person's job or their career path, right? You want to learn. And when we talk about specific jobs, let me just say, let's say you want to be a training and development manager for a big company. Like that's your goal. You think that's what you want to do. I'm going to tell you to talk to at least 5 people that are training and development managers or have been training and development managers in large businesses. Start by reaching out to veterans, then reach out to non-veterans, military spouses, everything, right? But you want to get 5 phone calls with them. And on every phone call, you're going to ask the following things. You're going to ask them, what do they do every day, right? Like, no, really, where do you spend your time every day at work? And if they say meetings, you don't say, okay, what kind of meetings? Who's at the meetings? Are you leading the meetings? Are you attending the meetings? What are you looking to get out of the meetings? What are the overall deliverables for the meetings? What are the purpose of the meetings, right? And if there's multiple, yes, follow-ups for multiple, right? What do you spend your most time on outside of meetings? Is it reports? Is it training? Is it communication? If you're talking about a training development role, like how much are you actually spending training? How much are you spending prep, right? And what are the things you have to do to prepare for training or to get new training involved, right? Then what are your biggest challenges, right? So with follow-up questions, my biggest challenges are budget. Well, what do you mean? Well, I've got to, figure out, what training I want to do. Is it going to be remote? Is it going to be in person? Who's going to attend? Do I got to bring other instructors in? All that stuff. How do you figure that out, right? Like, what's the benefit analysis between remote and being in person? What's the breakdown for how many do that? How many training opportunities do you offer a year? How do you track success for those training opportunities? How does it align with the business? What kind of approvals do you see where I'm going with all of this? You want to really get into the details. And what are your biggest challenges? Like what are the hardest things for you to do or that you're unable to do? And the beauty of that is when you dial into those answers, you can have the things that you're going to want to highlight that you've done on your resume. Like answer to the question. And then what are your biggest successes? Again, with follow-up questions, explain what the successes are and why they considered a big success and what made it a big success, right? Then we've got what metrics do you track to show your performance or to evaluate performance? This is huge. We don't typically have to justify our existence in the military. Congress has an end strength. Units have manning. They try to man to 100%. They get as many as they can, and you perform what's due in your role. And if you perform a little or perform a lot, you may or may not get promoted. You may or may not get other opportunities or schools, but you're still going to be there unless you get removed. Not exactly the same way in the private sector. The private sector, the money's got to come from somewhere. The company's making an investment in that role. And that's why sometimes you'll see restructuring where they get rid of elements or whatever. There has to be a cost-benefit analysis, right? And so I will tell you that just to break even on what we have to pay for an employee, most companies are at 1.3. What I mean by that is if your salary is $100,000 a year, I'm just going to make it nice and easy math because it's public math. If your salary is $100,000 a year, right? Then it costs you just to pay your salary, it will usually cost about $130,000 a year. For an additional $30,000 for state taxes, employer federal taxes, benefits, state filings, like all that kind of stuff. And that's for average benefits. If you get better benefits, better programs, it will likely cost more, 1.4 or more. And then you have your cost for overhead, which is the burden percentage of what you cost the company. It could be for your computer equipment. It could be for offices. It could be for your percentage of the HR staff, the non-billable staff, right? And so for a lot of companies, depending on the size, you get up around, companies are looking at around probably 1.65 or more just to break even, right? And so what I will typically tell people is that you're going to look to want to get 2 to 3 times of value to a company to know that you're safe, right? Like if you're 3xing your salary, you're probably pretty good unless something went really south. And so this is where metrics come in. What metrics do you track? Like an I Love Me book, but what metrics do you track to show your success, right? And I will tell you, when I was at EY, there were certain metrics I had to track. I had to track utilization rate. So they wanted me to bill a certain percentage of my work on contracts. So, I had X number of hours a week that I had that billable, and that number was tracked. And to be honest, that pretty much covered my salary. And then I had my managed revenue, which is the revenue that the people that I directly managed on a contract, their total revenue numbers is my managed revenue. And that was big for being a senior manager, to show that I was managing work on a contract, larger impact. You can look at margins and stuff like that. Then I had my revenue goals, which is new work that I won for the firm, right? And so that was a number for opportunities that I went into the system and put in there that I was leading an effort for capture on. I built a team on, and we went and won, right? And the system was called Mercury at the time. And you could go in and get all these numbers. And then team revenue. And that was a pipeline of the opportunities I supported other people found. So maybe another senior managing director partner started their own opportunity, but they needed introductions. They needed help with writing a proposal. They needed help with solutioning, whatever. I supported that. I reminded them to add me to the system. I got team credit for that. And so at the end of the day, when I went through Mercury and I looked at my performance, I could distill it down into a number, right? Like this is what I was bringing the firm. And I would know that I was doing everything that I needed to, and I was safe, right? And so for every role, you have to look to see what makes, I don't want to say what makes you safe, but are you performing in a way that like the company can't do without you in a lot of ways, or they would lose if you left? And that's what I want you all to consider about. And if you are a cost center, meaning you are not driving revenue to the business, right? Somebody else is bringing the revenue in, right? Then you have to think about this. If I were to leave, or if the company would cut me, what would be the impact on the business? Could other people slide over and pick it up? Could they offshore it? Could they get somebody else to do part of that role, and then they don't need me and save money? And if you genuinely look at it and the answer is yes, then I would ask for more work. I would look for more things to do. I would get engaged more across the ecosystem if you want to stay there, to make sure that you are indispensable. And so that's my, career advice there. So let's get to the transition topics of the week for the next 15 minutes. So the first transition topic I want to talk about is leadership. And I want to talk about the dichotomy between two cultures. Now, both in the military and out of the military value leadership, right? Industry values leadership. The military values leadership. There's a difference. The military structure prioritizes leadership as the skill, especially when you get up, above E7. They start to prioritize leadership over everything else. They could take you and make you the leader of an organization that's in a skill set you never had. In fact, they do that sometimes to broaden you, right? But in the private sector, there's no job that's just titled leader. Like there's no just generic leadership job, right? You are coming in to lead a function, and you have to have experience in that function. You cannot come in and be an HR leader without HR relevant experience. And it's got to be relevant to that business, right? You've got to understand workforce planning, sometimes labor law, employment law, unions. You've got to understand benefits and compensation, open enrollment, all the different things that go under the HR umbrella. You've got to have that experience, even if you have a team doing it, because you're expected to lead it from a place of knowledge. Same thing with finance, same thing with logistics. You could go down the line. Just being a leader isn't enough. But the problem is we get into the I can do that mentality where, and I shared on a post, you can go back and look at my activity this week, but it was like program manager. Well, I can do that. This is my own perfect example. I was applying to these roles. I can do that. I lead the operations for 17,000 people in 45 countries with an annual budget of $330 million. HR manager. I could do that. I lead the operations for 17,000 people in 45 countries. ... Logistics manager. I lead the operations. Like, we just kind of like say our leadership experience is relevant for everything, when the reality of it is when we interview, when we look at candidates, the question is, how much risk are we going to assume by hiring them? Do they know everything? And two, what have they done? Like, what have they done? I can't hire you to do business development on your own in the government contracting world with all the relationships we have if you don't know how to get from an idea to a contract or an RFP to a contract. If you don't know anything about it, right? I have to hire additional people to teach you or support you how to do it. So then you start getting to the cost benefit analysis. I can't hire you like we have this work at DLA, financial analysts, business analysts, financial liaisons, and accountants, right? Like, we can't hire you to do financial liaison or business analyst work if you can't speak to when you've done those basic tests. And I will tell you it's in your background, but you got to work with people in those fields to be able to identify it in a way that makes sense. So you have to stop saying I can do that. You have to stop saying I'm a senior leader so I can be in charge of it and I can just tell people what to do. The most important thing we're looking for is, what have you done? Like, responsible for sucks. Let me tell you, I claimed credit for that $330 million annual budget in INSCON. I claimed credit for it. I didn't do a dang thing with it, except show up to the UFER meetings and try to get a few extra items for the soldiers. That was it. I didn't disperse it. I didn't obligate it. I didn't go to the budgeting meetings. I didn't build a budget. I didn't talk to contractors. I didn't go to source selection boards. I did nothing, and I just claimed responsibility for it. And so if managing a budget was one of my, like, if the budget was a key piece of something, I could put it on my resume that I had it. But when any competent hiring manager started to question me on what I did, I would have failed miserably. And so I will ask you is, before you say, I can do that, I want you to consider saying what you've done. Let's go on to the next one. And I've got this guy, Jacob, commenting here. And, I'll say LinkedIn's hiring a ton of people. We hired a bunch of people from LinkedIn. I'll just say, like, quite frankly, nobody's hiring you because you have a bad attitude. And if I looked at your profile, it was probably not aligned with what I'm talking about earlier. And so I will encourage you to attend my next Mastering LinkedIn webinar. If you are a veteran, it looked like you might have been from your photo, I would encourage you to go get access to some resources like American Corporate Partners. We'll give you a mentor that'll work for a year. USO Transitions. We'll give you a transition specialist. Hire Heroes USA will help you with your resume. Syracuse IVMF will help you earn a cert and pay for the exam. There's a lot of resources out there for you that you could take advantage of. But the moment you start posting on social media, things like that, you make it actually harder for yourself. So those are conversations you have with people offline. Online, you need to be professional and you need to be engaging. All right, build relationships. So let's talk about building relationships on LinkedIn. When it comes to LinkedIn, what I'll say is that it's no different than real life. It's based on shared backgrounds and interests, mutual connections, conversations come out of it. And so there's an easy way, and it's not 100% foolproof, but there's an easy way to get to a relationship. And thanks, Peter. I'm on the advisory council for American Corporate Partners because I believe in the mission. And I've seen Sid Goodfriend and the team, connect people with Fortune 100 company executives for a year. It's invaluable. With any program, it's what you make of it. So I just encourage you to thank your mentor profusely, and don't be afraid to ask for additional support once you've gotten into the hang of it. So when it comes to LinkedIn, the way to intentionally start to build relationships is to first, do these searches and connect with people you share background interests with. I will usually say start with veterans. Like, just reach out. Hey, I noticed you're a veteran. You found success at, Bank of America. I'm getting out in a year, or I got out last year and I'm trying to figure out what's next. You would love to connect and maybe get some advice. So you send the connection request. You do not make a big ask. You don't ask for a job. You don't ask for a resume. You just ask to connect and maybe get some advice. If they accept, you send a quick thank you. Hey, thanks for connecting. I really appreciate it. Thank you. If they respond, you respond to their request for the thank you, right? Then the next thing you do is, you start to share content, and if you see any of their content, you comment on it. And what that is that's, you're like bumping into them and chatting, right? Or sharing something about your unit, your organization, your favorite sports team. Philadelphia Eagles, my Randall Cunningham jersey. I'm ready for the Pennsylvania State Championship this weekend. But you start to engage in comments. So hopefully they see your name and your content several times. And then, you post stuff. And then what happens is, after you've been posting for a while, you go back to them and say, hey, thanks for connecting. Maybe you ask them a real easy question. Like, what is the right time for me to go back and ask about, to follow up with a recruiter? Or, what would be the best degree I could pursue to make myself marketable? Or is there a certification you think would be valuable to this field? Or you can even ask, hey, I'm struggling a bit with finding my fit. Do you have a few minutes to just give me some advice? And that's how you start to get the conversation going. And it's usually like breadcrumbs, right? Start off small, unless they come right back in and say, yeah, and there are a lot of veterans that will happily jump on a call. But like, start out small, say thank you every time you engage. If they tell you to do something, do it. If they recommend you something, do it. And then come back to them when you're done, so they know that you're going to put the work in, because that's the key to turning a stranger into a mentor and into a sponsor. I shared a personal post about like my feelings on LinkedIn. And so I've been posting every day for over 8 years. And so I have this massive network. I've got a loud voice in the space. I teach all the generals and admirals. But I'm very direct when it comes to feedback on profiles, on posts and stuff like that. And the idea is not to be mean. It is, I am, what is it, juking and jive? Like, I'm literally just giving tips, asking hard questions, trying to get you to think, challenging your thoughts on something like that as a rip the band off mechanism, right? I don't want you to just continue going on that path without ever knowing that you may be going sideways. I give you, all my advice comes from experience. Like, I've lived it. I've experienced it. The whole, like, every senior manager is not every senior leader is not a program manager. I started out with a project manager headline. I started going through my PMP. I hated it more than anything. Not that it was bad training, not that it's a certification. I hated the whole concept of being a project or program manager. And so I stopped doing it. I said, that's not me. So I've lived through all of this, and that's why I share it. My way is not the only way. And so what I'll tell people is there are all kinds of thought leaders in this space now. They're all over LinkedIn. There's all kinds of nonprofits, some better than others. Just reach out and explore and find your trusted source, right? Now, what I will say is, I did an Ask Mike episode earlier this month, and there were a couple, highly, high-performing senior enlisted leaders there that had gotten, in my mind, really, really, really bad advice from a nonprofit. And then the advice was to civilianize their profile, and they civilianized it to the point that you could not tell what they've done. But they didn't have the industry knowledge to make it look like they were somebody that could actually do what they said they wanted to do. So you were in this no man's land of struggle. And I asked them, and they both said it was from this nonprofit, and it's a wonderful nonprofit. And so, unfortunately, what it comes to is it's probably an individual at the nonprofit that just, probably didn't have the experience and was just sharing what they'd heard and trying to actionalize it. They're not a bad person. I'm not a bad person. What I want you to consider before you take any advice, and we're talking about TAP class, outside of the curriculum, basic information. I'm talking about nonprofits. I'm talking about all the nonprofits. I'm talking about me. I'm talking about several of the other big voices out there. Before you take their advice and implement, what I would tell you is to consider from where the experience comes. Have they done this before? Like, have they worked at that level? How do they receive the advice to advise you on LinkedIn? Have they been a hiring official? Have they been a recruiter? Right? Have they worked in the federal jobs process? Right? So, like, there's a ton of people that can advise me on veteran rehabilitation and employment programs. I would go to Alfredo Torres, who is actually a Voc Rehab VRE rep, trained and certified. There are a lot of people that can talk about disability. Like, for me, I would not go to someone that charges me for it. I would go to the VFW, the American Legion, the Wounded Warrior Project, those types of organizations that are trained VSOs and certified by the VA. When I talk about human resources management, I go to my buddy Gary Steensgaard. To me, he's a subject matter expert. He's been doing it since he got out as a first sergeant, and his path from senior enlisted leader and recruiting over to where he's at now is something that I see echoes what I would have wanted to do. And I value his experience and insight. So I just tell you that when someone gives you advice, consider where it's coming from and weigh it appropriately. And ultimately, what I'm going to tell you is, I'll tell you my feedback on LinkedIn. I do find that I'm an expert on LinkedIn. I have worked with LinkedIn Recruiter. I've been doing staffing. I've hired a lot of veterans. But my advice from industry perspective is always going to be reach out to veterans that have been where you want to go and talk to them. Like, I'll give you advice all day. Back it up. Go talk to veterans. Here's how you do it. Go talk to people in that job and just verify what I told you. And in doing so, you'll build the relationships you need. And of course, hey, look, you don't like it? Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. And you know what? I'll high five you. Because at the end of the day, I just want you to be successful. I don't want anybody to have as hard of a transition as I had. And then, the last part of this, and I don't want to end on a negative note, but I just want you to consider, we get stuck up on translating rank, right? Trying to translate rank instead of translating accomplishments, what we actually did. And so I see a lot of people, usually like E89, 05, 06 level, just put executive somewhere in their headline. Put executive when they translate their title. I saw somebody said they're an executive senior leader. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Or an HR executive out there. Like, what does that mean? Like, we don't use the word executive that way out here, except for like executive assistant and account executive. And an account executive is like sales related, managing an account. And so, like, I was an executive at EY at the lowest level of executive as a senior manager. But I never, when people said, what do you do at EY? I never said, oh, I'm an executive. No, I said, I'm a senior manager in people advisory services on the Army account. So I'm a senior manager. My service line was people advisory services, and my sector was the Army account, right? And then anybody in management consulting would understand the service line, sector, and rank title where I am on the pecking list. So instead of saying you're an HR executive, which is like, look at me, I have rank, I'd rather you just say human resources management and then list the different elements of under the HR umbrella that you have expertise in, right? That you find will be valuable to industry. And then network and let your connections and let industry tell you where you fit, what level you are. Don't get hung up on rank when it comes to this stuff. It goes sideways too fast. When you start throwing executives in there, unfortunately, what happens is sometimes you lose out on opportunities because like, oh, this is not an executive opportunity, not executive level. So I want you to consider that. And then the last thing, on a positive note, what I would say is that consider how far you are pivoting from your military experience when taking your next role. And what I mean by that is like, imagine there was ladders leaning up against a building. If you're going to step across to the ladder right next to you, like you could just step across and you don't go down any rungs. But if you have to, and if you're going to step across and step across and step across, you stay. But if you jump ladders, you're going to go down a few rungs. Like if I'm going to skip the ladder next to me and jump 3 ladders over, I'm probably going to end up 4 rungs down. I want you to consider this when making decisions on what you want to do next. So what I mean by that is if you are, say I'm an Army Intel Sergeant Major, if I go get a GS job, I can get a comparable GS job with only, probably not really a step down. If I go into consulting on an Army account, I could probably, if it's the same type of responsibility, stay at a comparative level because I'm not jumping over too far. If I'm going on an Intel project or on an Intel accounting in defense contracting, same thing, right? Not that far. You could stay generally within the same range. But if I decide I want to go if I decide I want to go do talent management in tech, I'm not going in at the sergeant major level. I'm not going into the director level. No matter how much I say I have training and development experience, I'm probably going to have to jump down a few rungs and then work your way back up. If I want to pivot to being a tech person, like you're not going to be a technical program manager with no technical experience. So you will jump over several ladders, start over here, but you can climb up really fast, right? Because everything else comes to bear. So just think about that when charting your next career. Choose the right ladder, have realistic expectations of where you're going to start on that ladder. And I will tell you, it is not to start as high as you can because then you can fall very fastly. It should be starting at the right level that allows you to sustain that climb and get to the top. All right. And with that, thank you all for the 30 minutes this afternoon, and I will see you next week.